Today is proof that life can be unbelievable because I am here with the phenomenon that is Derren Brown. Now, internationally acclaimed for his brilliant blend of mind manipulation, misdirection, magic, psychology, and illusion. Darren first came to our screens back in 2000 with Mind Control, and he's kind of not really stopped since. He has won Oliviers for his stage shows with Something Wicked This Way Comes and Svengali. And he has then gone on to play Russian roulette live on television, get a nation stuck to their chairs, get someone to assassinate Stephen Fry, as you do. He has enabled robberies, heists, zombie apocalypse, you name it, he has done it. And it is no wonder, therefore, that he has received so many Olivier nominations for his one-man shows and more than anyone else in theatre history. He is also an established painter, photographer, and writer. And now he is adding director to that because he has a brand new project, unbelievable, and we cannot wait. So thank you so much for joining us today, Darren. Not long to go.
Hey, hello. I know, it's very exciting. At the moment, we are in our preview stage, still in Colchester in Essex. And yeah, can't wait to pick it all up and come see you guys.
I know. So I know your show's it's always kind of keep the secret. But this one is basically been described as a magic show like no other, and it's the creative brainchild of yourself and your long-term collaborators Andy Nyman and Andrew O'Connor. So what can you tell us about it?
Well, yeah, my ones are always very shrouded in secrecy. This isn't quite the same this time, although there are, I still don't want to give away exactly what's in it, of course, because it relies on surprises, as any magic show would. But yeah, we sort of over the last 20 plus years, I guess, have sort of tried to do something different with mind reading and my shows, and we thought it'd be fun to do the same thing with magic. So it's definitely a family show. It's not something to be daunted or scared about, as I know some people are. They come and see my shows, which I quite like, but it's not like that at all. It's a fun, uplifting thing, and but we just tried to kind of approach magic from a new angle. So, for example, it's not magicians in it as such. It's as in not professional magicians that are just doing their act, which is what magic shows have always been. So we got actors and musicians, and just wanted to build it from the ground up as a great show. And actually, what it's meant is one of the interesting things that's come out of that, apart from the fact that actors are much easier to work with and direct. They're used to taking notes and so on. And also you can write a show with a beginning, middle, and an end, which you can't do if you're stringing people's acts together. But it also, a thing that's come out of it is that it's sort of egoless in a way that you don't normally have with magic. You're sort of very aware of someone's ego. I think it's one of the things that really gets in the way of magic. So I think it has a really lovely sort of warm feel to it, which I haven't really seen with any other magic show. And it's much more, it's more sort of musical and it has a very different feel. It's really hard to describe without seeing it, but it has a very different feel from, I guess, what people might think a magic show might be. And the magic is phenomenal as well.
Yeah.
It's also important not to play that down either. It's terrific.
So it's important just to say that, obviously, so you are directing the show, you're not in this show, just so that there's no sort of false expectation. But as we said, you're directing it, and I suppose teaching as well, because you're having to pass on your knowledge to this fantastic cast. So what has that been like?
Yeah, so the three of us have written and directed it together. We sort of all share that, and then we sort of split into three really, and work with performers in different ways. So some of it has been very kind of one-on-one, and it for us and for me in particular. And it is interesting because there are some things that actors get very intuitively, which actually it makes things easier, because often magicians don't normally make particularly good actors. And then there are other things that you kind of realize are much more difficult, things I would totally take for granted, and things that magicians get quite instinctively. That's actually is quite a lot to even find the language for and put into words and teach somebody things that I sort of really took for granted. And then there's quite aside from the magic, the actual performance side of it. Like, it's very interesting for an actor to just deal directly with members of the audience, because you don't do that in a play.
No.
You know, there's this fourth wall between you and the audience. So that's, again, not something to take for granted. So when we were auditioning people for it, that was one of the things we were looking for. Is not just, you know, how good can you act a script? That's only part of the story, because you're dealing with people that they don't know there's a script. They don't know what the script is. They don't know what they're supposed to say. They're coming up and taking part and could do anything. So that was a really important part of it. And as also, I think for me, it's always the performance stuff that's most interesting to work with people on. In a way, the magic sort of, in some ways, is the easier part, and largely it's been left for the three of us to devise. That's often more difficult than the actual performing of it. It's not necessarily, some of it is sleight of hand heavy, which has been very sort of technical for them to learn. The rest of it is stuff that we've thought through and devised, and then they're sort of presenting it at the heart of it. But they're, you know, the skills are different, and then there are some really weird, intricate mentalism sort of skills that I've had to teach a couple of them as well. That's been fascinating, because it's stuff that I kind of would do, but also wouldn't do. Like, I'm not musical, for example, so it's quite a lot of it. We use music in it in a way that I know I couldn't do, so that's been really fun, and also fun to sort of explore the wider world of magic, which again it's just stuff I wouldn't do. I wouldn't kind of get up and do on stage, and that's really great, because it's stuff I love. It wouldn't suit me. It'd be weird if I started doing it. So it's been a really enjoyable, very liberating experience to kind of teach it and sort of play with it with a bunch of enthusiastic people. They're a really wonderful cast. There's like so the numbers vary. I think it's sort of 8 of them. I think maybe you'd see at a time. So it's a proper cast, and they are so great and been really patient with us as well. It's been a tricky show to get together.
I can imagine, because like you say, you've got to find people who are brilliant at what they do, and so the best of the best at what they do, but then the right kind of person who can take on, like you say, these suggestions and be able to influence other people, but also, I guess, people that you trust, because you're passing on like your knowledge here. It's going to be someone that you trust, that isn't going to be straight on social media going, oh, this is how we did this one.
Oh, I'm sure they are signed up NDAs up to the hill. I'm sure, but they're really passionate about it. I mean, it's been a really, they had varying interests in magic. Most of them had done some, or had like a period in their lives and they'd done a lot of it. Some of them had no contact with magic at all, which actually was really refreshing. So yeah, that is quite, that is a fun part of it. But it's also like, there's one guy in it who does some mind reading, but he's so different from me. It's a completely different sort of personality, and that's lovely, because I've always felt there's like so many different ways of doing these things. And often when you see magicians, and in more recent years, mind readers, I always find them just a little bit the same. Like, there's only 3 ways of doing it, and there should be as many ways of doing it as there are personalities, as there are magicians. So that's been a really nice thing, actually, just starting with, here are these actors and here are their personalities, and obviously, because they're actors, they can be a lot more flexible with that. And then that's also meant that we've had to then write the show around. We had the show written, and then we met them, and then realised, actually, we need to kind of rewrite everything now around these people that we've got, because it is really important that you feel like you are meeting a person and not an actor who's doing a script. You know, I think whatever you see, whether it's magic or you go and see a singer or whatever it is, you kind of just want to connect with a human being. I think it's a really important part of it. And a weird thing about magic is that it fights with that, because if you can click your fingers and make anything happen, you're sort of superhuman, and that's not really that interesting to people. And that's why magicians normally, after a few years, they might be very cool for a bit, and then they start to become figures of fun. You have to kind of navigate that, I think, if you're a magician. It's sort of almost like a little built-in time bomb. So that thing of remaining human has been much easier to do with this group of people, because they haven't got all that normal stuff that would get in the way. And I think it really works.
So when you're rehearsing, and you have the audience that is kind of at the heart of your show, How do you rehearse a show where the audience are at the heart of your show without an audience?
Yeah, no, you can't. So we rehearse it for ourselves. So we, the three of us will sit and watch it, and then we get it as good as we can. And then towards the end of the rehearsal period, which might be, for my shows, it's normally about a month, 6 weeks, maybe a little longer with this, maybe a couple of months. We bring in just some friendly people, like friends of friends, and families and things, and just so maybe we might get like 10, a dozen people that will watch it, and that's sort of handy. But they're not very reflective of a real audience, because they're kind of perhaps a bit too friendly. So we do what we can, and then it really is about the opening show. So we've been in Colchester for about a month, and really it was a very, very bumpy start. Doing stuff just didn't work at all, and literally didn't work. Like we had to stop the show, and really sort of eggy bits. But that's sort of part of the process. You have to just listen to an audience, and they'll tell you what. I guess it's the same with a play or anything, but they'll tell you what's working. They'll tell you, and sometimes it's surprising. Bits we thought, no, I don't know, that maybe that won't really land, was sort of like, oh my God, they love that, and actually that's really magical in the room. And other bits we thought would be great kind of don't really work. So then every night we're changing and rewriting, and which is again why you need a very patient cast and company generally, and the technical side as well, to bear with us on that. And we do exactly the same with my shows. We just keep working and working until the audience are telling you that it all works. And then do they get up on their feet at the end? It's things like that. And then it's just constantly polishing. Well, one of the shows I did, the whole of the second half was faith healing. It was a show called Miracle, which is on, I think it's on Netflix now. So it was faith healing, as in that kind of very evangelical style of faith healing, which I just had no idea if that was going to work with people, because it's one thing if you're part of a crowd at a kind of evangelical, rally sort of thing where you're expecting it, but if you're not, and you're like me and you're quite skeptical, it's a bit weird that I'm doing it. We didn't know if it was going to work at all. So that was like a whole half of a show that could have just fallen flat on its face. But I just sort of felt like, well, I suppose what you do is you build in things that will work almost like mechanically. So even if it doesn't really work great, at least you'll be able to do that bit and get to the end. And then you can either keep writing and keep working on it, or just ditch the idea. And actually with the faith healing, it worked really well. And so then it's great, because then you feel like you were thinking a bit more bravely. And then if that works, then it's a really good payoff. So yeah, it's really tricky. And everyone just has to kind of hold their breath and sort of grit your teeth a bit on the first few nights or couple of weeks or whatever, until you get it in a place that you think, yeah, this is good.
And Miracle, you've just mentioned there, that's actually one of my favourites, along with Showman. They're my two favourites. And it's because you put these, you've got all of the, I love my sense of perception being challenged, but what really hooks me in, particularly with those two, is the emotional connection and kind of the opportunities for looking at your own life that you put in there. And I think that's really special. And I think from what I've read, that Unbelievable does that as well, looking at the way that we're all kind of playing a magic trick in life, that we misdirect people to just see what we want to see. Have I got that right? Is that kind of...
Yeah, well, we always start with, what's the show about? And I think my shows are probably always going to be a little, I've sort of got a bit more license maybe to sort of communicate something overtly, that's sort of more philosophical or whatever, because I guess that's just sort of more me. And I guess audiences know me well enough to sort of take that. And we did find, of course, with an audience of people that with a cast of people that you don't know, it's actually some of those things we wrote, we thought actually doesn't really work from a cast you don't know. So we started to pull back on things, and we're sort of it's been interesting looking at that. But we still start with what is the show about, and then it's just finding ways to comfortably communicate it in this new form. So yeah, it's a show about, and our starting thought was that we all do this magic trick in real life, that you kind of have this outside version of yourself that you present, which is well polished, and hopefully, it's the best, all the best bits of you, and it's like an Instagram feed. It's just this curated version of yourself that's, great, and we all do that. But then there is this sort of inner life as well is all the stuff you want to hide, right? So like with the magic trick, you've got the bit you show, and then you've got the method, all the stuff you hide, and you keep it secret, which you think if anybody saw that, then they wouldn't fall for the outside bit, and they but and it's a worthwhile distinction, because we all make the mistake when we see people presenting a good outside, people we meet at a party, we think, oh, they're cool, they're interesting, they're successful, they must have their lives together. We just sort of forget that they also have the inner life going on with all the same clumsiness and ugliness and awkward, embarrassing stuff that we all have. But we sort of, and there's two really important things that does. One is and this is stuff I spoke about in Showman. It connects us all at the level of the difficult stuff in life. All the stuff that makes us feel isolated and lonely is exactly what we all share, right? It's just part of the human experience. And I've always felt that's a really useful thing to remember, because all the evidence that your senses get says the opposite. Everyone else seems like they got their stuff together, and it's just you going through but actually it's not. And the other thing is, and the show talks about this throughout in Unbelievable, is that we make the mistake of comparing our insides to other people's outsides. So we go, oh, well, they're really confident and successful, and I feel this, and I'm insecure about this, blah, blah, blah. And it's a total mistake. You can't compare those two things, because everyone's got the same two levels going on. And you just can't do it. All you can do is remember that everyone else has got that inside thing happening too. So that was sort of like, when we were thinking about what is it about magic, which is this quite childish thing, and you're just trying to impress people, and it can all be a bit silly, but what could it be about that's a bit more interesting than that, or a bit more grown up, or a bit more like you could take something away, and actually that might be might be useful. Like, for example, gratitude. If we practice gratitude, and that doesn't just mean saying thank you, it's sort of paying more attention to the things that we have already and appreciating those, rather than just kind of consistently wanting more, because then maybe you get those things, then you're on to the next thing. Those things really help with those those bad comparisons that we make between insides and outside, how we compare ourselves to other people. There are things that we can do, gratitude, compassion, the right sort of pride that we take in what we do, that just stop us doing those things and just balance things out. And they're important stuff to remember. So so we tried to root this show in this kind of magic trick that we're all doing, remembering it's a magic trick that we're all doing, and to not try and compare our insides to other people's outsides, just to stop making that mistake.
This is what I love about your shows. It's like free therapy almost. There's such a message there. It's brilliant. And one of the other things that I love about your shows, and you probably don't really get to see this because obviously you're on the other side of it, but when you enter the venue for one of your shows, everybody connects immediately. And everyone, you're talking to strangers and you're going, oh, have you seen one of his shows before? What? And everyone's connecting. And there's this heightened sense of anticipation. Everyone's pumping with adrenaline. So by the time we get into the theatre, we're already in this heightened state. I mean, we must be playing straight into your hands to come in like that.
That's so nice to hear. And actually, when I was doing Showman in the West End, I realised that if I opened my window in my dressing room but closed the curtains, I was looking out right where people were queuing up to go in. So every night I could, as I was sort of getting ready, I could just sit and listen to that sort of thing. Because you're right, you don't get it. You just Same with touring. You just dressing room and you go out, and it's a spotlight, and you might not even see the audience until like 5 minutes into the show when the house lights come up. And it's really important as a performer to remember that it's not even just that. It's not even just the fact that there's the buzz in the room, but it's like people have booked a babysitter. People might have driven quite a distance, or even like sometimes, people fly over. I talked to someone afterwards, they come from, some other country. I'm like, God, I wasn't even thinking about any of that stuff. I was just going out and just doing the show, and so it's so important, all of that to remember. And some of it is, we always give the audience things to do and things at the interval as well. Try and encourage a little bit of that, because it is fun. It's a lovely feeling. But yeah, it's really nice to hear, and it's a really it's important to. It's really important to harness it. I think if you're any sort of performer, hopefully there is always a bit of an energy of expectation, and it's important as you're writing a show and performing it to sort of harness it and sort of acknowledge it, and it makes you pay attention to how you start a show and things like that, how you kind of what you come out on stage with. I think all those things are really important. But it's lovely. It's really lovely to know, and I think this show has a nice, very buzzy start to it as well, in the same way, even though they don't know, no one knows who the cast are. I think we've managed to create, I think, a similar sort of feel.
Definitely. And so we're in the theatre. You come on stage, or in the case of Unbelievable, we've got the cast coming on stage, and there's kind of this unwritten contract that while in this kind of show, while you're on stage, you've kind of got this power, this control, but it's consented because we're kind of wanting you to have that. And as we've said, you play into that with giving us this sense of vulnerability and connection. And it's something that I've personally taken on board in quite a big way, and it has altered my life. And I've been thinking about it, and this opportunity for life that you weave into your shows. I want to put it to you that maybe that is the real magic that is on offer from your shows. What do you think? Because it changes people.
Oh, that's what I'd love to think that. And I think occasionally, if I hear from somebody that they have taken something from something like that, I know this sounds a real cliche, but I do mean it. It makes it all worth it, because you can feel a bit, like you're just going out and being silly, or you're just sort of, I don't know. It's doing a show night after night after night. I do everything to make that feel present, and I love doing it every night. But it's you can forget that might have a real impact on people. So it's lovely to hear. I think I've always, or maybe not always, I think at the start it was only ever about, look at me, aren't I clever? I think that's the subtext of any magician doing any trick. But as I've got older, I think the stuff I've found interesting in life, which certainly isn't that, it's much more to do with how we might live, and you naturally become more aware of things like your own mortality as you get older, and the stuff that I read and the stuff I just find interesting sort of had nothing to do with what I was doing for a living. But then, as we just naturally needed to find ideas when we were putting shows together, what can this one be about? And those shows might take, whether it's a TV show or a stage show, it might be 8 months, a year of my time, or if I am doing it night after night in particular, you want that to be about something you sort of believe in, and something that feels worthwhile and important, so that even if you have had a crappy day and you're out doing a show and it's no fun that night for whatever reason, or if it's 6 months of filming stuff to all the logistical nightmares of putting a TV show together, you want to feel at the end of the day that it was something worth doing. So I've always tried to think, as I said before, from this sort of this quite childish and dishonest place that magic starts you at, what could be grown up and honest about it? And then, I mean, really, that could be anything. Then the magic just becomes a sort of the tool for, if I sang, maybe I'd sing songs about those things, or if I did something else, ultimately you go, what's the thing I want to communicate with this act, or this thing that I've ended up sort of doing for a living, and particularly because of the honesty dishonesty thing and all of that, for me it keeps it interesting, because it isn't always obvious how to do that, how to turn something childish and dishonest and often very self-serving, look at me, aren't I clever, into something that's grown up and honest, and is something you're giving, is something for the audience, not for me, and also a show that's about the audience. I always try and make the show about the people watching, not about me and what my abilities are, or whether I can read minds or not. I know that's of course that's part of it, but I hope it's not ultimately the bit that people are going to go away with. I hope it is about something more interesting than just those, how did you do that trick kind of questions. And actually, I think if it wasn't for that, I think I'd have stopped it long ago. And it's it just makes the whole thing a delight. And it's you know, if I go out, and there were some shows on this, I did a long tour with showmen, and some of them were tiny theatres, and they hadn't marketed it, and it was only half full, but rather than going out and finding that depressing, it was like, oh, this is going to be like a little intimate gathering here. Like, it's like, I say small, maybe it's like 300 or 400 people that have come instead of 1,000 or whatever. But these are the ones that have made the effort to come out. So I'll make sure this feels like a really lovely, intimate, special thing for us all, like including me. And so I think those things help. If you're not thinking about it as something that's about you, it makes the whole experience of doing the show and touring and everything that comes with it much more fun, and feels like it's worth doing. But anyway, it's very nice, and thank you for saying so.
No, it's true. I could ask you a million other questions, but I don't want to keep you all day.
That would be a lot.
It would. I'll just finish with one more. Do you ever, when you set out with these ideas, do you ever kind of start with one thing and then find that you get something else out of it as well? I'm getting at something in particular. So I rewatched, I know this isn't the right name, but The Push, that one.
Yeah.
I rewatched that the other night, and obviously it's about social compliance and how far can you push someone to do the ultimate, thing of murder. And it was only afterwards it struck me for the first time that actually, even though this person was the subject of social compliance, it was the cast of actors who massively interested me, because I thought, well, they were all socially compliant with you because they were doing everything that you told them to, even though it was something that under normal circumstances, they would not watch another human being suffer the way that person was suffering. So there's kind of, even though it was about that person, it also ended up about everybody else, and like social compliance is kind of everywhere. So do you often start with one thing and find something else comes out of it?
Well, that's a really interesting thing you highlight, actually, because obviously I've done a number of shows where we've got a bunch of actors and they're pushing some poor unwitting guy through this sort of dark experience to a really dark place. And when we first started doing that, we were obviously very aware of this sort of duty of care to the person that was going through it. But as we started to do more, it became clear there was this other duty of care towards the actors, because they were, all right, they weren't the ones in the end that thought they might have, for a moment, might have killed somebody, but they were making somebody do that. They were taking this often very likable person, which is one of the reasons why we choose people, because they're likable, and that makes you feel for them more when you watch it. And pushing them to this awful thing over a sustained period. So it was a really there was this whole other, and particularly in The Push that you mentioned, there was this whole other actually, I don't know if people have seen it, but yeah, you've got this guy called Chris, who's the main guy in it, who's going through and being pushed into killing somebody at the end. The main guy that he's with was an actor called Tom, who was brilliant, but he was really having a tough time with it, because he was, more than any of the others, was had to make sure that Chris was kept on track, and really found it very difficult. And he managed to separate that from the job he was doing, which was sensational. But so it became more and more of a sort of a thing as we went through. And yeah, I haven't done any of those for a while. I think if I go back to TV, as I'm sure I will, it's been quite nice having a bit of a break. But it would be nice to do something sort of very different now. I kind of feel like I've done that sort of thing quite a bit. But yeah, there's all sorts of things, I think, going back and watching them again that come out of it. But yeah, people don't often mention that side of it, but that's nice that you see it, because there is a whole other question there. What about all these people that have put this poor soul through it? And you're right to highlight it.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today. I have got a big tick next to one of my bucket lists now. It has been an absolute pleasure. And you can catch Derren's brand new show, Unbelievable, from the 29th of August to the 2nd of September. I'm sure it is going to be exactly what it says on the tin, unbelievable. So come along, and it then goes on to the Criterion in London. So thank you for bringing it to Manchester. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really lovely to talk to you. Thank you for
You too. Thank you so much. All the best.
Nice to meet you. Bye, Karen.
You too. Bye.
Everyone you meet is performing a magic trick.
That's unbelievable.